Hi, I'm Brian Elkins, and recently we heard a claim that video games there's no influence of video games and violence. The claim that the advocate made said that violence in video games has zero to minimal influence on a normal child being more prone to committing violent acts. The secondary claims were that those who attribute video games to crime would have committed the crimes without the video games. Violent video games have failed to produce an increase in violence, and that there are problems with the study showing an increase in aggression after playing violent video games. In my response to the major claim, the speaker did not define a normal child. Because of this, the audience is not familiar with the group of people indicated in the claim. Also, the claim is not relevant because anybody who commits a violent act would not be included in the normal child group. So the claim neglects the problem being addressed. In response to the secondary claims, his first claim that those who attribute video games to crime would have committed the crimes without the video games is not sufficient. He used an example of a video game not being attributed to violence by a judge. The judge said that the defendant did not, the defendant using the video game as an excuse for his crime was not sufficient. It's also not sufficient because it only takes one case and it does not include the entire population as a whole. Also, the speaker made a contradiction in it. He claimed that the child had also been abused, which attributed to his violent acts. By using the word also, he implies that abuse added to the aggression from the video games. In his secondary claim, he points out that juvenile crime rates in the U.S. are at a 30-year low. This statistic only supports a claim towards violent crimes. His claim is about violence in general. He fails to include such acts as school fights or crimes that aren't prosecuted. He also claims that no research shows that video games turn normal people into killers. Even though there is no research, he once again uses the term normal without advancing or claiming its relevance to his claim. Also, killing is just one form of violence. He does not support violence in general with this claim. His final support for this secondary claim states that 64% of Americans have played video games in the past 6 months. This is not a relevant statistic because he does not use it to advance his claim. He simply throws it out without explaining the inference that the audience is supposed to be making. His third claim is completely flawed and even supported opposing claims. First, he stated those who participated in studies did not commit a violent crime. This cannot be used as acceptable evidence. Any rational person is not going to commit a violent crime while being studied, and even if they did, they would not admit to it. His next supporting claim is that violent people playing violent video games play it because they are violent in nature. This does not advance his claim because these violent people are enhancing their violent nature through the playing violent video games, making them more prone to committing violent acts. Dr. L. Roel Hoosman, Director of Research Center for Group Dynamics at the University of Michigan Institute for Social Research, says, when you are exposed to violence day in and day out, it loses its emotional impact on you. Once you're emotionally numb to the violence, it's much easier to engage in violence. His final supporting claim states that one study actually shows an increase in aggression from video games. This is a contradictory statement to his overall claim. He goes on to say that this is because, just because there is an increase in aggression does not mean that these people will commit violent acts. However, the majority of violent acts are committed in aggression, so this would support an opposing claim. As you can see, this argument has a lot of errors that detract from the overall claim. These errors cloud the audience from supporting his claim. With the more development, the argument would be much easier to support, but as it stands, there are too many detractors.
All right, well, the main points are labeled, so it's easy to follow. The question of what's normal then is introduced, and there's not really an explanation about why that definition matters so much in either rejecting the claims or advancing the claims. The presupposition seems to be that there's obviously something wrong with somebody if they commit the aggression, but if they commit the aggression as a result of playing the video games, wouldn't that be a normal person who then is turned into somebody who's abnormal? I'm not sure what you get by this whole challenge on that point. It just seems like you're playing some game with semantics as opposed to really giving us a refutation of the point that's going on there. You advocate the advocate's evidence on the first point, but you know, and you say that it's making some presuppositions, but you don't explain why your position is superior on that, and it just seemed like, again, you're kind of going in circles. The second point is labeled pretty clearly. You do have some data here on, you make some claims here on other kinds of violence that may not be reported, for instance, or it might be limited kinds of violence or aggression that falls into different categories, but you don't have any data on any of those points, so it's all just kind of a hypothetical example on that issue. And as a consequence, I think you've got an okay press on the point, but not something that I think would be a definitive argument that shows that that point was not really valid. On the last argument, you know, you basically are talking about the nature of the study, and here's another place where I think you're going a little bit in circles with the language on the argument. Of course, they're not going to commit a crime while they're being studied. I think you're missing the nature of what the research did, and I think you are stating something that's obvious to almost anybody. Of course not. But the question isn't whether or not they're going to commit the crime under the observation, but whether or not there is anything in their record that indicates that crimes that they may have committed may be related to their playing of the games. And I just think that you're kind of spinning your wheels on the verbal manipulation there. The contradictory evidence that the advocate presents and your explanation of that, I thought that was a good general argument to be making there. And it's an attempt to use the advocate's evidence against them in the sort of backwards direction. So everything is labeled, your explanations are presented. I think that you're spinning your wheels on a lot of the verbal gymnastics that are going on there, and you're doing a lot of rushing. I would say, same like I've said to a couple of other people, 90% of this argument could have been done 5 seconds after the other speaker presented. You need to do a little bit more in-depth material to have a stronger refutation. All right, thank you.